Professor Gary Jefferson. And thank you very much, Gary, for your support. So let me introduce Gary to the audience. And before we talk about some research, Gary is now a professor in the Brandeis University, USA. And he's a Karl Marx Professor of Trade and Finance, and also a Senior Research Associate. So Gary obtained his degrees from different places, and for undergraduate, and that was from Dartmouth College, for masters from London School of Economics, I think, and PhD. His PhD was from Yale University. And Gary has done quite a lot of work on China, and so that you can understand that Gary had a lot of experience working with Chinese universities. For example, Chinese University of Hong Kong, Wuhan University, and Fudan University. And of course, Gary has traveled a lot and has had a lot of research projects, I think coordinated or collaborated with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and the National Bureau of Statistics and the Ministry of Science and Technology. So I know Gary's work from a long time ago, so we have to read Gary's work on China. So in my impression, actually, I thought Gary is an expert on China. So particularly at the early stage when China started the transition, so Gary published quite a lot of pieces on China. So, but as you can see that Gary continues to work on China, and we now have some recent works on China, particularly on R&D, innovation. So, for example, you see from the introduction, Gary has a forthcoming piece on identifying technology spillovers, evidence from firm-level patterns, R&D intensity and market value, etc., etc. So this is very recent. For other works, early works, I think you can just go to Google Scholar, and you will see a very high citation there. And you can read the pieces that you are more interested in. Now, Gary actually has done quite a lot of work beyond China, and that is mainly on innovation and technology. So that's, I think, why we have a piece today, and that is based on the very classical Solow growth model and the debate surrounding this model, but in connection with technology advance. So I would suggest to people who are interested in general economics, you can also go to Gary's recent work. So Gary, we have some economists here, which is good news. But for non-economists, I have already got the permission from Gary that if you want to interrupt or you have a question, please raise your hand. And Gary is very flexible to discuss the issue and to open the discussion. Gary, thank you for your support, and to our activities. I now give the floor to you.
Well, Hongbo, thank you very much for the extremely generous introduction. I sometimes don't altogether recognize who it is you're speaking of, but I will show at any rate. But thank you. And for everyone here, I'm delighted that you're here. I will say right at the outset, Hong said that I am very flexible with regard to people speaking up and asking questions. Let me be more clear about that. I'm not at all flexible about that, in that I find that standing or sitting, particularly online and lecturing, can be without interruption. It can be quite an insufferable experience. I really very much welcome interruptions, questions, comments at any time, in order to translate wherever possible just the ongoing lecture into some back and forth discussion. So whenever there's a chance to facilitate that, please feel free to do it. I just want to say at the outset, that I too am on my side extremely delighted to be here at SOAS, at least on the screen, if not physically. And I appreciate everyone who's here showing and having the patience and interest in this topic. So I suspect that we all share, as Hung indicated, commonality, with regard to a specific academic interest in an area of the world. Mine happens to center on China. And as I will explain, this research, whereas while it's at a very theoretical, abstract level, very much evolved from my on-the-ground work in China. But again, I'm delighted to be here. I've looked at the SOAS's website, and I'm very intrigued with one partial statement, which says we use. Let me move this. We use our expertise in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East as lens through which to interrogate the planetary questions of ... I don't think there was anything that followed that on my screen. So it leaves open the whole question of what the planetary questions are. And it does also provide a challenge in that I hope that we can raise some issues that are somewhat approximate the planetary level of interest and excitement, with your help. Okay, so let me just say this paper that I'm about to present, or at least parts of it, are under review now at the Journal of Economic Growth. It's been 2.5 months. I'm waiting impatiently for some feedback on this, which will be forthcoming at some point. And once again, please do feel free to ask questions, okay? Or don't feel free, just ask questions. So my background, yes, I've lived in various places, and yes, I've been at Brandeis now for some decades. At Brandeis, I taught courses on the economy of China, development economics, and the economics of innovation. And these courses had some commonalities. And one was that I tended or tried to build these courses around works of various Nobel laureates. So you can see from this partial list, the individuals and their specializations that would intersect, with China, development economics, and the economics of innovation. But it turns out that one of these articles and one of these Nobel laureates, that is Bob Solow, repeatedly and consistently showed up. And his article in particular, his iconic piece in 1956, A Contribution to the Theory of Economic Growth, was very important for framing our understanding of development, particularly the interaction of population growth, savings, technical change, and how they orchestrated in particular ways in order to generate long-term growth. However, over time, I became increasingly frustrated with that model, and the frustration is going to kind of percolate to the surface over the next half hour or hour. So this is the origin, kind of the origin of the talk. So let me just be clear, in an outline kind of way about some of the dimensions of the Solow model. That is the good, the bad, and the ugly. I will not pursue the ugly description so much. We'll just call it unfortunate, okay? The good part is that it's an extraordinarily simple, parsimonious paper that's now provides the axiomatic statement regarding the central role of technical change in driving long-run growth and rising living standards. And as such, it really is embedded in textbooks around the world at the undergraduate level and in terms of compendia and analyses of textbooks on growth and development. It's the benchmark model for much of modern growth theory. The bad is that the entire message is not scientifically valid. And this is pointed out by Eichner in his paper, Why Economics is Not Yet a Science. And in that paper, he identifies two broad requirements for research to qualify as being scientifically valid. And the first is that the research or the paper needs to be internally mathematically consistent. And the second is that externally, the results of the paper need to be consistent with readily observable sort of empirical environment. And as such, the Solow model very much satisfies the first requirement, but not the second requirement. And that is because of the way in which it represents technical change in the steady state as being Harrod neutral. And that means, and we'll describe this a little more, so that it'll become clear to those of us who are not entirely familiar with various classifications of technical change. Harrod neutral technical change means that it's purely labor-augmenting change. That is, it's only labor that becomes increasingly efficient in its use as a result of this technological augmentation. And as such, it means that physical investment, is entirely devoid of technology augmenting change itself. Okay, so that we're investing in the same old things year after year, as long as we are functioning in the Solow steady state. And that, of course, is problematic. All around us, we see dynamic change in the physical objects and physical world with which we interact in terms of houses, cars, medicines and medical devices, smartphones, and so forth that are changing decade to decade, if not year to year. And yet, this message has become axiomatic in modern growth theory. So this is the matter that sort of upsets me, in that teaching this, either we kind of suppress this part of the unfortunate message, or we talk about it and make some spurious claim that it actually is the way the world works. So, and it's unfortunate, again, I don't say ugly, but it's unfortunate that since 1956, when this article appeared, most of modern growth theory has built on the Solow benchmark foundation of neoclassical growth theory. And that includes the endogenous growth literature, so that we have well-known articles by Lucas, Romer, themselves Nobel laureates, which are completely devoid of technology augmented investment. Okay. And that is deeply problematic. Now, one other stream of literature takes issue with the fact that that model does not allow for capital augmenting technical change. And it divides that literature, these articles, that many of which are also very notable, try to devise models by layering additional theoretical complexity on the Solow model in order to crack open the door to allow for some technology augmenting capital investment. But in doing so, they compromise the parsimony of the Solow model and simply make it more theoretically complex. And then finally, the fact that at a theoretical level, the Solow model, with its emphasis on purely labor-augmenting technical change, really does create a divide between the theory and the applications. That is growth accounting and other applied forms of applied growth work, a divide between the theory and the application that is largely unbridgeable. So those are extremely, I imagine, very unfortunate implications of this particular representation of technical change. Okay. So let's, as backdrop to this, let's outline these two different classifications of technical change. That is Hicks and Harrod. Okay. So both of them in their representation assume fundamental properties that are typical of neoclassical economics, and that is constant returns to scale and diminishing returns. Okay. So let's first look at Hicks Invention neutrality. Okay. And let me explain why we're looking at both of these. That is, it's very intriguing that when, and this is not widely appreciated or discussed, in 1956, when Solow wrote his paper, or his paper was published, he represented technical change not as Harrod neutral, but as Hicks neutral. And throughout his career, he seemed to believe that indeed technical change was Hicks neutral. But what we're going to show is that subsequently, Urawa and others showed that Hicks neutrality within the Solow paper was not mathematically consistent with the steady state model that Solow had developed. And therefore, it had to be replaced by Harrod neutrality, which was mathematically consistent. Okay. So because we're going to be talking about whether the model should or could represent technical change as Harrod neutral with purely labor augmenting technical change, or Hicks neutral with both, and what could be done in order to allow it to have accommodated Hicks neutral technical change in its original state, rather than having to throw out Hicks neutrality and substitute Harrod neutrality. In order to do that, we do need to know the two different kinds of technical change and what the implications are of those. So first, we have Hicks neutral technical change, which I said is that which Solow himself initially incorporated into his original iconic study in 1956. Okay, so the key feature of Hicks invention neutrality, as you can see on this line in the slide, is that you have capital and labor, which are both augmented equally by A, which is the factor of augmentation. Okay, that is, both capital and labor together augment at the same rate. And so Solow, in the article, when he is introducing Hicks neutrality, He explains an especially easy kind of technological change is that which simply multiplies the production function by an increasing scale factor. Thus, we alter y equals fkl to read y equals a of t fkl, okay? And that is as he mentions, the output number attached to each isoquant multiplied by AT. So A then can increase from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 as an index of technical change. And as it increases, it means that the capital and labor on hand become increasingly efficient in their production. So I just want to mention, that this can be actually represented in different ways, and we'll see that it really does have some at least intuitive importance as to how it is written. That is, as equation 2 shows, you can actually take that AT, which is sort of outside the function, and incorporate it within the function so that it matches with both K and L, okay? And we can designate capital augmenting technical change that pairs with the capital stock, and labor augmenting technical change that pairs with the workforce, okay? And when it's Hicks neutral, that means that the AK and AL are equal and change at the same rate. They may not be entirely equal, in which AK and AL can grow at different levels and at different rates, as shown there in 2. So 2 can be more flexible than 1, okay? And we can also take 1 and or 2, and convert it into a rate of change, okay? So the rate of change simply says that the growth of output is weighted sum, which happens to be, to sum to constant returns to scale, summing to 1, alpha at 1 minus alpha. The weighted sum of the rate of change of AKK and ALL, okay? So that then represents, instead of the level, the rate of change of the inputs of augmented capital and augmented labor, which together produce growth of output. So that's Hicks neutral technical change, okay? Again, if there are questions, please ask them, or comments, please share them. So now Harrod neutrality. So here's the Harrod neutral formulation. And basically, it just drops the A in front of K so that it shows that technical change is only labor augmenting. And the capital investment in the steady state only accumulates capital with the same fixed technology, okay? That is, while L is becoming more efficient, K, the units of K accumulate, but each successive unit of capital is no more or less efficient than the previous level of capital that was installed. Okay, so how do we choose? How did Solow and Samuelson choose? And what is the implicit choice that modern growth theorists are making between these two, particularly when they choose Harrod neutrality rather than Hicks? And why do they make that change, okay, that choice? Okay, so in order to understand why they make the choice and the whole issue of the internal mathematical consistency, we do need to have some sense of the steady state, okay, in the Solow model. So basically, what we're saying here is that every theoretical model has 2 parts, okay? And one part is all the framing assumptions, okay? And those framing assumptions, in turn, that part of the model then determines what the result is. Okay, so you have all the framing assumptions, then you apply some hocus pocus mathematics to it, and out pops a result. Okay, so those are the two parts. I suppose an applied paper also has two parts. It has a hypothesis, and you apply some data to it, the hocus pocus data, and some statistical methods, and you get a result. Okay, but we're particularly interested in the assumptions that sort of frame, the initial model on which the result, evolves and results. Okay. Okay. So here's the steady state. And let me just highlight a couple things about the steady state. Okay. So within the Solow model, there's an equation called the equation of motion or the equation of investment. And this simply says that investment, which is DK, the change in the capital stock, okay, change in the capital stock, is determined by total savings, which is the savings rate times total income, okay? Lowercase is the savings rate, Y is total income. And so S can be fixed, the savings rate, but as Y increases, then investment will increase according to this equation of investment, okay? Now, we have to derive a steady state condition here. Although this assumption is most important, that is dk equals sy, is kind of the glue to the model. Okay, so let's see what it's gluing together. To see that, we can take dk equals sy, as we do in the next line, and divide through by k. And so the dk over k, change in capital over the capital stock, gives us the rate of growth of the capital stock, G sub k, which is equal to the ratio of total savings over the capital stock. Okay. Now, a steady state condition requires that there be balanced growth. Okay. Well, what does balanced growth mean? Balanced growth means that the factor inputs of capital and labor are growing at the same rate. Okay. And this then allows for the steady state. Okay, that is, if they're growing at the same rate, then one factor is not going to overtake and crowd out the other factor. And one thing that enables you to make sure that you're growing at a steady state with balanced growth is this condition of diminishing returns. So if one factor grows, and the other one is stagnant, then the one that grows, while the other one is stagnant, suffers from diminishing returns, and the system becomes inefficient. So we like for there to be sort of balanced growth, and indeed that defines the steady state. So we take our equation here that we have. Here we go. GK equals SY over K. And since that's the growth of capital, we set it to the growth of labor, okay? Now, in the growth of labor, you see, we define that the growth of labor as having the two parts. One is the labor force L, and then we have the prefix there, AL, basically saying, listen, labor, we all know that labor grows from two sources. One is that, the actual number of workers, the head count can grow, or they can become more efficient over time, as their wages rise. So we allow for that. So this formulation allows for a little broader sense of our notion of labor. Okay, and so GK equals SY over K equals GAL. Now we're going to solve for the capital output ratio. Okay, so this is kind of what we've been trying to get at. And that is, we expect that in a steady state economy.
Gary,
Yes.
Gary,
Yeah.
did you move your slide? Did you, we are, okay, now I see. So,
Yeah.
So
okay.
Where's the labor? We did not see the labor things.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is labor. Yeah. Okay. This is do you see this? Whoops. Uh-oh.
This is the Hicks, yeah.
Yeah, this isn't, this should be,
Okay.
this is the capital, and this is the growth of labor, okay?
Oh, there, okay.
Right
Yeah,
there. Yep,
yeah, yeah,
that's the growth of capital, that's the
yeah,
growth of labor,
yeah,
and they have to be equal in a steady state.
yeah,
Okay.
okay, yeah. So you are
Okay.
here, okay. Yeah,
Thank you
that's
so
good.
much. Yes. Okay. And so what we do now, again, assumption is made that in the steady state, the savings rate is exogenous and fixed. And also in the steady state, the growth of capital, whether it comes from more workers or from an increase in the efficiency of capital, is also exogenous, okay? And so we put those on the right-hand side here when we solve for the capital output ratio, and the capital output ratio then is endogenous, and it is determined by these two externally fixed factors in the Solow model, being the savings rate and the supply of capital, supply of labor, okay? Savings rate in the numerator, the growth of labor in the denominator. Whatever that ratio is, it fixes the capital output ratio, which has to be fixed in the steady state, okay? And as I said, that fixed capital output ratio is, of course, one of Kaldor's 6 stylized facts of economic development. And we see also, and I want to emphasize that all of this really starts with and is built on this, sorry here, built on this equation of motion here, or the investment equation, dk, the change in the capital stock, is equal to the rate of the total amount of savings, okay? And from that, we're able to derive this requirement of a fixed capital output ratio. Any questions at all? Anything? Okay. So this is the key steady state, the key steady state. And the point is that whatever the choice of technical change, whether it's Hicks, Harrod, or whatever it may be, the expectation is that it will be consistent with this inviolate, critical, Solow steady state, okay? And so, as I said, there are two parts of the model, every sort of theoretical model, the framing assumptions and then the result, okay? So these are the framing assumptions that are embedded in Solow steady state. The result is going to be whatever kind of technical change we finally are able to agree upon that's consistent with the steady state, okay? So Hicks neutral steady state inconsistency. Okay, so this was the problem that Solow encountered. He didn't realize he had made this so-called mistake. It was Urawa 5 years later, and then Samuelson and others who piled on and said, listen, it can't be Hicks, which you chose. It has to be Harrod. And now we're going to show you why the Hicks, that is Solow, your choice of Hicks, was actually inconsistent with the first part of your model in which you developed a steady state, okay? So here's the problem. And, there's some math here, but let me try to explain the intuition as much as possible, okay? So if it's Hicks neutral, okay, that means here we are right here, Hicks neutral, okay? What happens with Hicks neutral technical change is that Solow assumed that this A, that is the augmenting portion right here, okay? You see it? That augmenting portion is the part that drives growth, and it's going to be exogenous in the Solow model. So there's exogenous Hicks invention neutral that is augmenting both capital and labor, as shown by that A, which is going to be growing continuously, exogenously over time, thereby driving growth, okay? Now, that's not the end of the story, however, okay? Because once you have this kind of, these ongoing shocks, of increasing A for the model, augmenting capital, augmenting labor, it generates growth and an increase in Y, okay? Well, remember, we have our equation of motion. The point is, and I should have written down, that equation of investment again, dk equals sy. The point is that as a result of the increase in A, Y or output increases, which means that it then activates the equation of investment. So there's going to be more investment in K, okay? And there needs to be more investment in K, okay? Because as a result of the change in A, K and L don't change. They just become augmented, okay? So as a result of the investment equation, what's happened here, if we look, this is our required capital output ratio. This dynamic change, the increase in A increases Y, but as I've said, neither K nor L themselves have changed, okay? And so if Y has increased, but K hasn't changed at all, the capital output ratio has fallen below its required equilibrium level. So there has to be something to allow K to grow that is more accumulation of capital. And so through the equation of investment, as a result of the increase in Y, capital increases, okay? So we can say that not only do we have the initial increase in A, which is augmenting the supply of both K and L, not actually increasing K and L, but making K and L more efficient so as to augment the supply of capital and labor. Not only do we have that, but then we have to follow up with, in the Solow model, as a result of the steady state condition and the equation of motion or equation of investment, in order to restore this required capital output ratio, we have to allow capital to inherit that increase in K, increase in output, so that the K can rise in order to restore the requisite balance between capital and output, okay? Now, the problem...
Gary,
Yes.
Gary, can I ask you a question at this stage?
Please.
Just, for us to
Yep.
to catch what you... So we started from this exogenous driver, the assumption, because technology can change labor, the technology content of labor and capital. So you said, and at the end of the day, the output is going to be changed as well.
Yes.
So is that then we are talking about from an exogenous driver to endogenous growth model?
Yes. Well, part of it, because the A, you see, growth.
Gary, if endogenous growth is allowed, why do we have to change K?
Okay. So we're going back. This is not yet an endogenous growth model. Okay. This is the original Solow model, is a neoclassical model which depends upon exogenous growth. Okay, so A is purely exogenous. Okay, it's only later with Lucas, Romer, and others that they begin to endogenize the technical change. Okay, but now the technical change in the Solow model is all of an exogenous nature. Okay, and then within the model, there are, as you pointed out, sort of endogenous activities or results from the exogenous change.
Mhm.
And those endogenous activities all center on that equation of investment, okay? That is the DK, change in capital investment, is equal to SY, the amount of savings, okay? And the point is that once you've had the exogenous shock of an increase in A, it increases Y, or output,
Mhm.
and that then activates this endogenous change, in which there's then the endogenous investment in K through that critical equation of investment. So the point is, you're actually getting two separate episodes of growth. One exogenous, increasing the efficiency of both capital and labor. The second one being that only capital is then further affected through the equation of investment, okay? So that's exactly the point that creates the inconsistency, in that you've got only one positive growth shock to labor, which is the initial exogenous augmenting shock to labor, but you've got two shocks to capital. First of all, the same one that affected labor, because this is invention neutral augmenting change, consistent with Hicks. And then you have the endogenous response, where Y has increased, which, working through the equation of investment, results in the further accumulation of capital, K. Okay, so this means that in the steady state, you're getting the total amount of capital growing at a faster rate than the total amount of labor, because the total amount of labor is only receiving the single impetus to growth, the A impetus, whereas the total amount of capital is receiving two impetuses to growth, the same exogenous augmenting shock that labor received, followed by, as you pointed out, the internal, within the model, endogenous accumulation of K, okay? And so for labor, you've only got A rising, okay? Whereas for capital, you've got the same A increase, and the K then increases also. So the combination of those, that is the augmenting and then the basic capital, unaugmented capital, together means that the total amount of capital has grown more than labor. And so the result is inconsistent with the steady state. Okay.
Very
Great
clear.
question. Thank you.
Very clear now. Yes.
Good.
Gary, thank you. Yeah, please. Yeah.
And yeah, okay. So that's the point. Urawa in 1961, 5 years after Solow published in 56, in 61, Urawa's steady state growth theorem basically made the point, that if technical change is Higgs neutral, then you're not going to have the steady state, because capital is going to be growing faster than labor, and it violates the Higgs steady state requirement. Okay, so the question is, how did Urawa, and then we'll see Samuelson also loaded onto this, and all of modern growth theory, how have they chosen to fix this problem that was originally embedded in Solow's iconic 1956 paper? Okay, so the steady state, it seems, is inviolate. Now, as I said, remember, there are two parts to the model: the framing assumptions and the result, okay? The framing assumptions, they're not going to touch, okay? But they are changing the result, okay? Framing assumptions are there. That is the steady state model that we looked at. They're not going to fool around with that, but they are going to come up with a form of technical change that's consistent, internally mathematically consistent with that. So the Hicks assumption has to be changed. It's inconsistent. The condition dk equals sy requires capital to accumulate to inherit whatever the exogenous increase might be in the factor accumulation. So, it's grown too much, okay? So what can we do? Well, because capital has had two sources of growth, the exogenous and the endogenous, we got to do away with one of those, okay? If we do away with one of them, so they both have a single source of growth, then there's more of a chance that they're going to be growing at the same rate. And so what they did is they did away with the exogenous part of augmenting technical change as it related to capital, and just limited the exogenous increase to labor, okay? Well, that exogenous increase to labor then also affects Y, because labor has become more efficient, then output is going to grow. And now we can rely upon our trusty equation of motion, or equation of investment, dk equals sy, to capture that increase in the Y and translate it into more investment, as we see here from this equation. And indeed, that then is able to do two things. It allows, because the endogenous investment inherits whatever increase in output that has resulted from the increase in the exogenous augmentation of labor. And you've been able to maintain the capital output ratio. Therefore, it turns out that Harrod purely labor augmenting technical change, resulting in the endogenous investment in unaugmented capital, okay, this is K, which is unaugmented, just K. This has the effect of enabling the growth of the capital stock and the effective growth of labor to be in balance, to be equal. So hallelujah, we have been able to solve this problem of the steady state inconsistency of technical change centered on the Hicks model simply by supplanting the Hicks model with a Harrod model of technical change. So all the technical change now embeds in labor, and all the endogenous response to that now embeds in unaugmented capital investment, okay? And they're in balance, thereby giving us this solution to this very vexing problem, okay? Questions at all? So let's see how Samuelson gave this, what I call theoretical.
Gary,
yes.
Please, I saw a hand from Martin. Martin,
Awesome.
Please come in. Yeah,
thank you. Would it work? Would the steady state still be consistent even if GK is not 0, but GAL is greater than, AL is greater than AK. Even if AK is not 0, it's still positive. Could you have AL being greater than AK and still be consistent with steady state?
Whoa. Well, that is a very nasty we'll come to that. You see, one critical assumption of the Solow model is that the unaugmented factor and the augmented factor are perfect substitutes, okay? And this is why you can have labor continuously augmenting, capital not augmenting, but the K part, that is the unaugmented part of capital, K can be growing at the same rate as A for labor, and that is entirely satisfactory, okay? That is, you can have complements between K and augmented labor, okay? And you have perfect substitutes between L and A, that is unaugmented labor and augmented labor can function as perfect substitutes also. So I think the answer to your question is yes, you can have A, L, or just A, labor augmenting change growing, but have the growth of capital augmenting change be non-existent, zero, as long as the unaugmented portion of the capital stock is nonetheless growing at the same rate as labor's augmentation. Okay, so yes, there are some bizarre features, assumptions in the model that are a little sort of hidden, but that is one. That is the perfect substitutability between the unaugmented and augmented portions of the of labor and capital.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Okay, so let's see, how does Samuelson see this in 1965? Okay, we're almost 10 years after Solow's 56 peeps. So he provides the theoretical empirical legs for the mathematical requirements of Harrod neutrality. He's got three assumptions, but the key assumption, okay, and this is going to frame much of our discussion here. He says it is a factual assumption that capital in natural units, he says, is accumulating relative to labor in natural units. Natural units. Now, I am going to ask, what do they imagine a natural unit? What do we imagine a natural unit of labor might be? Anyone?
It's just number, right?
It's a number.
Just the physical number.
Physical
It's
number.
not the value. It's not the value.
No, it's a physical number. Well, it's a natural unit. I'm not going to bias you. It's a natural unit. Okay. Well, I'll shortcut us on this one before we get to the more difficult one. It's just a unskilled worker. Okay. Just a worker. Okay. So we can do a head count of the number of workers and assume they're unskilled. And those would be the natural units that are augmentable, right? Okay. Now the question, okay, what are the individual? Now the question is, what's a natural unit of capital? Okay, we got a natural unit of labor as being an unskilled worker, physical unskilled worker. What is a natural unit of capital? Is there a counterpart physical unit of capital? The problem is capital goods are highly heterogeneous, ranging from smartphones to 100-story high-rises, from a little microscope to an enormous, space vehicle. What would be a natural unit of capital? I'm serious about this question. If anyone can answer it, they get to be a co-author. Okay.
Gary, but there is no natural unit of capital because capital contains technology, contains.
Oh, you are sounding like Joan Robinson now. Yeah.
I know you want to find that physical things, but even the physical things contains technology, right?
Yep. Yeah.
But that's
okay.
my feeling. But maybe I'm wrong. But
okay. Well, you're absolutely right in your being wrong. Yes. And that is Samuelson, and they said, well, Samuelson and modern growth theory, they say, well, we're going to represent capital as the sum of investment in capital goods, thereby making the dollar the natural unit of capital. Okay, so you've got the natural unit of labor being a physical worker, the natural unit of capital being a physical dollar. Okay. All right. Okay. So those are the so-called natural units for Samuelson. And there's a big implication of that. What is the marginal product of labor? What do we call that? The wage. What's the marginal product of a dollar? It's the rate of interest, right? Or the rate of profit, okay? The wage in the steady state is steady or rising. It's rising. The rate of interest or profit in the steady state is rising or fixed. It's fixed, okay? So Samuelson writes that, the marginal product of labor, the wage, rises while that of capital is a fixed rate of interest. The increase, W over R, requires that technical change be represented as purely labor-augmenting Harrod change, okay? And Samuelson concluded, we know that realism requires that technical change be Harrod neutral and nothing else. There is no other way of ensuring a constant profit rate and a constant capital output ratio. So, you see, Urawa basically focused on the mechanical sort of inconsistency of Hicks and the Solow steady state. Samuelson brings, being Samuelson, he brings some theoretical content and empirical content to make the argument that helps to nail once and for all, seemingly, our understanding that technical change in the steady state must be Harrod neutral. Questions, comments? Okay. Now, it's still unsettling though, right? Okay. Because it's internally consistent now, but it's not altogether consistent with the readily observable, world in which we live, in which we see seemingly capital becoming augmented, transformed, from landlines to smartphones, from grass huts to condominiums and so on and so forth. And here we are, on computers and electronic devices and communications, thousands of miles apart, talking and learning now. So what gives? Problem, the result of Harrod neutrality, it's not scientifically valid with readily observable nature. So remember, there are two conditions to scientific validity. While we've solved one, we've created a deep schism with regard to the other. Every model has two pieces, a set of framing assumptions, a derived result. Our proposition, if the result of a model is internally consistent and not empirically plausible, the problem likely results from a problematic framing assumption. That is, there must be something in the Solow model that's problematic, if indeed the result itself is problematic, okay? And Solow's problematic framing assumption, that's it, dk equals sy. Why is it not dak equals sy? Why do we have al, that is, we allow for labor to be augmenting, but the very steady state basic model that frames the nature of technical change precludes augmentation, okay? So you see, this is tautological. If the steady state that frames the result itself appears to preclude augmentation in capital, then of course it's going to mean that the choice of technical change can't be capital augmenting either. It can only be labor augmenting. Well, this goes back to the natural units of capital, okay? And what Solow Samuelson say is, listen, you don't need the A, okay? Because the return on a dollar, K is all dollars, okay? The return on a dollar is fixed, A, so that's just a fixed scalar, okay? It's not changing. So there's no need For the A, we'll just drop it. It's a fixed scalar, it doesn't change the rate of growth of K or anything. And that's why we use this instead of that, okay? Okay. So, question, given this strikingly simple mechanical fix that both maintains internal steady state consistency and is plausibly consistent with observable empirical reality, this change right here, it's plausible. Why did growth theorists not adopt this solution? And I just gave you the overview, and that is the neoclassicists said, well, listen, K augments, okay, but its augmentation, that is its marginal product of $1, is simply a fixed interest rate. So there's no need, since it's fixed, no need to include it. Okay, so the road not taken, okay? Basically, we say, given the strikingly simple mechanical fix, why was it overlooked? The answer, let's look to the Cambridge controversy, okay? The economic luminaries in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the University of Cambridge that vigorously debated this matter. Okay, let's look at their debate, okay? And it very much centered on this issue, although it didn't quite get to the matter of technical change and augmentation, okay? During the 1950s, spilling into the 1960s, the conception and measure of capital was vigorously debated between two major academic centers, okay? And those were Samuelson, Solow, and others at MIT and Harvard. And then at the University of Cambridge, Robinson and her colleagues on the other side of the debate, okay? And again, Samuelson, Solow, capital can be measured solely in monetary terms, yielding a fixed rate of return, as we've said, okay? That is, the natural unit of capital is $1. Okay, Robinson and all, capital needs to be measured in physical, not monetary units. Given the heterogeneity of physical capital, unlike labor, whose physical units can be easily counted, it is not possible to identify an aggregate physical measure of capital stock. She seems to have arrived at the conclusion that we did. Hence, her conclusion is the aggregate production function, y equals FKL, is not theoretically valid. Okay, so that's the conclusion she drew, and so much of the debate centers on papers that go back and forth arguing, whether or not it's valid. There can be a steady state, with this financial measure rather than a physical measure, and so forth. And as we see, the Cambridge US side and the neoclassicists kind of won out in the debate, not its intellectual content, but the actual practical interpretation of capital. Okay. As a sarcastic gesture, Robinson formulated a metaphorical measure of physical capital, leets, which happens to be steel spelled backwards, right? And then you got others also coming up with their own metaphors, to try to show how, well, investment actually is like butter or putty or something, and then it once you invest, then it becomes fixed. But every new vintage is going to be butter that can be then transformed into the capital. And you can't just focus on the clay. You have to realize that the putty also is part of the investment process. Okay, so what this did, Solow and Samuelson aggressively defended the financial measure. It's now accepted. It's generally works, for most fields of finance, trade, labor economics. Okay, it particularly becomes a problem in this field of productivity and technical change when we talk about the augmentation of these natural units. Okay, then it really becomes, it rears its ugly head here. Okay, and so Robinson wrote, this is about the closest she came to really nailing the problem of financial units as the natural unit of capital, as it sort of debilitates our understanding of technical change. She wrote The Dominance of Neoclassical Economic Teaching, of the concept of a production function, which the relative prices of the factors of production are exhibited as a function of the ratio in which they are employed in a given state of technical knowledge, has had an enervating effect, distracting attention from the more difficult but more rewarding questions of the influences governing the supplies of the factors and the causes and consequences of changes in technical knowledge. Okay, so, she weakly made the connection without actually sort of nailing it to say, listen, as long as you have the marginal product of a financial unit of dollars, it's always going to be fixed, okay? And you need something that's symmetric in the aggregate production function. Either labor and capital are both cash, or labor and capital need to be both physical measures, okay? All right. So what's happened? It turns out that actually, Romer in his 1990 article, he doesn't have physical investment, okay, or technology augmenting physical investment. So he's one who just builds his model on the pillars of the Solow steady state, okay? However, his definition of technical change is very, very helpful. Improved instructions for remixing together raw materials. Okay, well, raw materials are physical, right? Implicit in this interpretation of technical change is the idea that the natural units of capital are raw materials, physical units that are remixed to create new objects consistent with improved instructions. Okay, so he is kind of backing into this space in which we're able to view capital in physical units here. And examples: the invention and development of the steam engine enabled metal and coal, the natural units, raw materials, to traverse increasingly long distances. Okay, in the modern world, we have this incredible decline of the storage costs of and computing costs of data. Okay, from nearly $1 million for a gigabyte in 1980 to just a fraction of a cent, or a cent, less than 2 cents in 2018. Okay, and that means what you have is basically less and less space, physical space, being able to generate multiples of storage and computing capacity over this time. Physical change. Okay. James Watt's designs of the steam engine and Moore's law center on the phenomenon in which raw materials, discrete physical matter, are remixed in novel ways to achieve greater output with less physical input. And there are others, okay? Actually, the economic literature, if we had time, we could go and see there are fragments of reference to this idea of the capital augmenting change, not called such, but change in products resulting from recombinations of pre-existing physical matter, cross-pollination or biological cross-pollination of plants to create ideas, as Weitzman's recombinant growth. Arthur writes extensively. He has a wonderful book on the nature of technological change, in which he talks about combinatorial evolution. So there's this theme of combination of physical elements that we're going to build upon, okay? Natural units of capital, dollars or atoms, okay? Is there not some common physical unit? Okay, so what I want to do, and this is Francois Jacob, I very much encourage everyone to read this wonderful article. He was a Nobel laureate, evolutionary biologist. who wrote about the essential differences between nature's sort of management of evolution and that of the modern engineer managing technical change. Okay. And he starts out by saying different combinations of the same atoms obeying the same laws were shown by biochemists to compose both the inanimate and the living worlds. He's basically saying that everything, whether it's, the machine in front of you or the ideas or something, they're all comprised of atoms, okay? And different combinations, and that means in the world of change, that it's the recombinations of those atoms that result in new kinds of both inanimate objects and elements of the physical world, of the living world, okay? That is, if a static object of a collection of physical matter atoms, then it must require recombination of those physical matter atoms to create new animate and inanimate forms, i.e. combinatorial change. Okay. In practice, combinatorial change functions within subsystems of daily employed labor and capital. Labor in the human brain, neurons combine to create new ideas. In the laboratory or factory, machines function by recombining atoms, molecules, and the relevant physical matter components to create semiconductors, batteries, and medical devices. So what we have here now is this picture of this hierarchy of levels of factors of augmentation. And what I'm suggesting is we not think of factors as factors of production, but think of them as factors of augmentation. If there's growth, there needs to be augmentation. We buy into the basic message of the Solow model, which is technical change is driven by long-run economic growth is driven by technical change. We just don't agree with the formulation of technical change, but the technical change is critical. So these factors really need to be able to engage with the process of augmentation, not just production, but augmentation for growth, okay? So what we have here are these 4 levels, and we have the aggregate generalized factors, which I call the platforms, okay? So labor, that is when you and I augment, become more efficient and whatever, it's not that we're growing another limb, eye or ear or whatever. There's really one subsystem that's basically at work, which is the human brain, right? Which is augmenting, okay? And so within each platform, and the human body is the platform, within that platform, there's a locus of augmentation, which is the brain, this incredible human machine, which is recombining neurons and synapses to create new ideas, okay? At the same time, within factories, we have machines that are recombining raw materials consistent with the ideas, consistent with the improved instructions identified by Romer to remix together raw materials to create new objects. And in this way, the ideas and objects are inseparable. You can't have new objects without ideas. And as Arrow explains in Learning by Doing and Learning by Investing, you can't have new ideas without change in the physical world driven by investment. Okay? And so they're very intimate and inseparable. So we have B and C go together. Okay, so we have A. The A-level factors are those that function as aggregate level platforms for the functioning of the BC subsystems. The BC subsystems comprise the recombinant systems, brains and machines, that remix raw materials to create new ideas and objects. And then we do have capital, yes. That is, the D level is application of creativity in human and physical capital investment, animate the B, C levels subsystems. Okay, so it's basically human creativity, investment that activates these systems, invest in these systems to create the improved instructions, resulting in patents and payoffs for patents and raw materials, resulting in new products that generate increasing profits and wealth for firms. Okay, so I see our time is getting a little short here, so I'm going to be quick about this and just say the paper I will make available, slides are going to be available, that in particular, there are two combinations of capital and labor that I think can qualify as both physical measures that can be embedded in the aggregate production function. And those are land and labor. Of course, land has its rich tradition in the Malthusian model, and labor augmenting in the Solow model. And also the firm and the household. And the firm and the household are candidates because both of these are typically the optimizing units in neoclassical economics, to optimize wealth and utility for the household, optimizing profit and value for the firm. They're connected by markets, and so they are, I think, very valid candidates, as for K and L in the aggregate production function. These are, again, not necessarily only factors of production, but factors of augmentation. And then, of course, we need the physical and human capital to drive this whole process. Okay. Now, I do have a little section on the literature. Again, we're running out of time. I'd love to have time for discussion. I simply want to say that the literature has really been sidetracked or untracked, I think, by this whole centering of the neoclassical benchmark model on Harrod neutral change rather than Hicks neutral change. And so you see basically three lineages of the literature, one of which sort of builds on the Urawa-Samuelson proof, trying to prove in various innovative ways that Hicks neutrality is inconsistent with the steady state and therefore it has to be something else. A second, which is that of Romer, Lucas, Agion, and Howard, and so forth. As I said, the endogenous key elements of the endogenous growth literature that build upon the pillars of the original Solow model, and none of these references physical investment in the model. They get goods, basically through building in a third sector in the model, not only just capital and labor, but something else, and in order to create sort of capital innovation, but not through technology augmenting physical investment. And then the third branch that, to the extent that these are grandchildren of Solow, he would probably be most favorable toward this lineage. And those are that try in some way to recover Hicks neutrality as being valid with the steady state. The problem with these is that they all build in very complex ways on the existing Solow model, simply to crack open the door to capital augmenting investment. And so they become very kind of onerous, and they lose the wonderful parsimony of the Solow model. So instead, basically, what we're doing is simply saying, listen, all you have to do is add A to K, and allow for the fact that K should not be a natural unit measured in capital that can stand by itself, but it's a physical unit of some sort that has to be augmented in the same way that labor is. And so we're saying, rather than totally transform the notion of technical change, and adding all this theoretical layering to the original model, just change this strand of the DNA to add a to the K, and that will fix the whole thing. Once you allow for augmenting technical change, capital augmenting technical change in the steady state, then you've come up with a frame that can accommodate augmenting capital investment as an element of the nature of technical change. Okay. And so this simply wants to argue that technical change, it shouldn't be, and as someone suggested earlier, I appreciate this, that it's not like you can have one factor that is continuously augmenting and the other is not augmenting. As Arthur says, we have two elements in technical change. One of these is a sequence of operations. We call this its software, which is the labor side. And these operations require physical equipment to execute them. We call this the technology's hardware. If we emphasize the software, we see a process or method. If we emphasize the hardware, we see a physical device. Technologies consist of both, but emphasizing one over the other makes them seem to belong to two different categories, devices and processes. The two categories are merely different ways of viewing a single technology. Okay, so I think this is a wonderful statement and a wonderful source of Arthur's, again, book on the nature of technological change, emphasizing that Hicks neutrality, invention neutrality, comes probably the closest, certainly much closer, to the actual world of change than Harrod neutrality. And so I have here a model, which I'm not going to dwell upon, simply to bring to your attention. And what it does is it endogenizes Hicks technical change so that both capital and labor technical change become endogenous rather than be exogenous. And we do this through this equation right here, equation number 2, which shows the production of A. And remember, A is really the critical factor here. This is invention neutral technical change. And what we need is an equation that can generate that. And here we have on the right-hand side, briefly, the level of output together with a fixed savings rate generates savings and investment in A. And then A is a stock of ideas and the stock of novel objects and so forth. The point being that sort of the more innovation there is, physical and labor, the more shoulders there are to stand upon in order to generate new innovations and new physical matter objects. And out of this, we're basically able to generate our capital labor endogenously driven model of technical change. Okay. And so this will bring us to our conclusions, and hopefully we have a little time for discussion. Hong can be the mediator of that. 2 key conclusions. 1, first, a major conclusion of the Solow model is that rates of savings affect only the level of GDP, not the rate of growth of GDP. And this is because when you have exogenous change in one factor, that is augmenting labor, okay, and then you have investment, the endogenous investment that follows, determined by the rate of savings and income. In the steady state, that investment only goes so far as to inherit whatever the initial increase in labor augmentation is, only enough to restore the capital output ratio. And that's the steady state. However, if you then have a fixed amount of labor and its augmentation, and you try to increase the savings rate in order to invest more in capital, and yet more in capital, there'll be diminishing returns to the capital. And so at best, when you increase the savings rate, you can only transition from one steady state level of GDP and GDP per capita to another steady state level of GDP and GDP per capita. However, in our model, if both forms of augmentation, capital and labor, are endogenous, determined by the rate of balanced capital, labor, human capital, physical capital investment, then you can increase the savings rate. And in accord with the various parameters in the model that do allow for diminishing returns and so forth, you can have continuous increases in output, so that now the basic result of our model is that savings, increasing rates of savings, not only lead to an increase in the level, but an increase in the rate of growth of technical change and GDP. A big, big difference. The World Bank and many other institutions have basically had their policies framed by the original Solow model rather than that. And the second is that, unfortunately, and we're all interested, much of my work has been based upon growth accounting work. This problem affects both Solow 56 and Solow 57. In Solow 57, he also assumes that technical change, as you'll see from his model, is Hicks neutral. Doesn't have to be Hicks neutral. It can come out as some combination of the two. But the problem, again, is that he frames the model and applies the model with a physical measure of labor and the financial, dollar measure of capital. And if the capital output ratio is always fixed in the steady state, you're never going to get a capital augmenting technical change, whether you use an accounting method or use estimation to try to estimate the differences in augmentation of physical and labor and financial capital. So all the same arguments that apply for the theory apply also to the empirical applications of Solow 1957 in his piece on capital and growth accounting. That's the second key result I wanted to share. So I really, really look forward to some discussion. This is the first time actually I have presented the elements of this paper together. So I would very much value your comments and feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. It's such a very thorough lecture about economic history, the surrounding the growth model, a lot of rich thoughts that I have not learned when I did my MSc from London School of Economics. So I think everybody knows growth model, but we do not know that much, debates surrounding that. And I understand that this is a very theoretical framework, and your contribution is actually to add the features of nature or something. So you emphasize on that side. So I think that's really thorough. So everybody has learned something, I'm sure. And I know we have some economists here, and even for non-economists. So I'm sure we have some questions and thinking about whether or not this theoretical model is consistent with the reality that we observed. I'm sure we have some questions. So before I intervene, do we have other colleagues who want to ask questions?
Or give a
No.
comment?
Yeah,
Yes.
or comments. I think Gary, you explained this so well, because I think that by nature this is abstract, theoretical, but you explained so patiently, and I think you made it very clear. Any other comments? Any comments or questions, or just no? So Gary, let me take Martin. You go first. Martin, you go first, please. Yeah.
Sorry, my mic was muted. Thank you, Hong. Can I sort of maybe push this into sort of the sort of policy implications? Because we know that Professor Jefferson, you studied China, and obviously, and you also mentioned the fact that the World Bank is still using the old Solow conception of technical change, which ignores the capital-augmenting part. We know that China and other Southeast Asian countries have been incredibly successful over the last few decades at generating growth. And you mentioned in your presentation the possibility of using the firm as the agent for measuring the augmentation of capital.
Yes.
And it seems, my area has been Africa, and the big difference between Africa, which has not had much growth, and certainly not much growth in labour productivity compared to East Asia, is the fact that there are very few firms in Africa, apart from tiny firms, micro enterprises. And whereas in China, there are, massive numbers of firms. And one of the, I think, I mean, again, I'm not an expert on Chinese policy, but one of the reasons for Chinese economic success, and that of Korea too, and other countries in Asia, has been the incentives given by governments to make firms innovate. Whereas that has not generally been the case in other parts of the world. So do you think that this focus on the firm as the agent of technical innovation for capital, at least, is useful from a policy perspective?
Yes. You, I think, rightly ground this in the experience of China. But, one of the very first economic innovations in China in 1979, 1980 was the creation of the special economic zones, inviting foreign investment and foreign firms into the space, geographic space of China, and resulting in joint ventures and over time transferring the intellectual property and reputational benefits from foreign firms to Chinese firms, like Lenovo and in the field of EVs and electronic devices and software, TikTok and so forth, very much absorbed foreign technology. And sort of that transmission line, part of which was, I think, very much reinforced by the enormous population in China and by China's very unique past, in which it, in the 19th century, in the Opium Wars, felt that basically it had been disadvantaged by not being able to create and access the technology that had driven success in the West. You find there's a very broad base, within the intelligentsia, within policymakers, and within the general population of the appreciation for technology. as compared, for example, with its suspicion, even here in the United States now. And so I think the combination of the large population, the historical appreciation and thirst for technology and growth and equalization with the West, and with the enormous flow and influx of foreign technology and institutional change that resulting in these firms have been really important. Yes. And I can't altogether sort of explain, as you probably can, why it hasn't yet been entirely replicated in the case of Africa or certain countries there.
Okay, thank you.
So, Gary, I thank you, Martin, for your question. And Gary, I have two questions or comments. You can. So, along the way that you led us through the development of the debate and then surrounding this issue, at the time when those very big names proposed something, we didn't have AI, for example. So what AI do you think will change this, everything that you have covered here? Can we still follow your proposal to measure it so that we can have the steady state growth, balanced growth? So that's my first question. I mean, AI, I use this as the example, representative example of everything that is very up to date in terms of technology. And secondly, Gary, I was thinking, I studied, you brought me back to LSE, so when we studied the new theories. But, after that, for my research, I'm an empirical person, so I used some for some papers, I used the growth model. We always start from the Solow growth model, and we augmentate it, and then we go to the endogenous model, etc., etc. I never thought about Hicks neutrality, Harrod neutrality. But the root reason that causes those things is the assumption that we have to have that neutrality. Why do we need to have that balanced growth? In fact, I do not observe that much balanced growth. And it's not like the growth, the technical content of the, labor, and the same thing for capital. It's not like, I do not think we have that many balanced growth in reality. So why do we still need to talk about this? Balanced growth is good, but steady state growth. So how long time do we need? What are we talking about here? So related to my second question is, I'm a little bit controversial now here. I know you do not agree probably, but what is the empirical implications in terms of the, we are now where we are in terms of the development of this, growth model, very conventional growth model. So that's basically my what I'm thinking while I was listening to you.
Well, thank you for asking two obviously very easy questions to address here. So the first one is about AI. Yes. So AI, so we think of the aggregate production function, and let's think of the Hicks neutral version of that, y equals A, function of KL. So I think AI is very much further shifting the emphasis from the KL in the parentheses, the natural units of capital and labor, to that A, outside, the augmentation. Okay. Now, what is interesting to me, I also happen to be very interested in the connection between nature and economics. And that includes how I happen to, my work on technical change tends to see technical change as but a chapter in the long millennia of history of change. Not only going back to the beginning of life, but before there was life on Earth, that the Earth's endowment, physical endowment, and the laws of nature were already recombining those natural units in ways that tended to be self-organizing, even before life occurred. And so technical change I see as but a chapter, okay? And actually, we may be entering into a new chapter, in that increasingly it seems that this whole notion of labor-augmenting change versus capital-augmenting change, the boundary between those is becoming increasingly ambiguous, okay? That is, with machine learning, how much of idea innovation still is embedded in the human brain, and how much of idea innovation is now becoming embedded in machines, okay? So up till now, it's always been very clear as to this distinction between the sources of labor augmenting change, meeting new ideas and patents and so forth, versus the sources of physical, of the recombination of physical matter to generate new physical devices that was very machine-based, and the exclusive domain of the machines was to produce objects, not ideas. So, this is very unsettling for sure. The other issue of the steady state, okay? Yeah, when are we in a steady state? One of the things that I find very aggravating is that growth theorists don't define the steady state. When are we in the steady state? Acemoglu says, well, technical change need not be purely labor augmenting outside the steady state. It can be capital augmenting, as long as you're outside the steady state. But when you're in the steady state, it needs to be purely labor augmenting, Harrod. Okay, well, if that's the case, you have to tell us when we're in the steady state, when we're outside the steady state. If I'm a firm trying to invest and figure out what kind of augmentation I want to do, you got to tell me when we're in the steady state so I can shift everything around to make sure that I'm not trying to do any capital augmentation. But I think that the steady state is useful for being able to imagine what the sort of idealized balance would be when you're getting the most out of investment, okay? And let's look at China for a moment, okay? So arguably, one reason China is sort of struggling as it is, its economy is struggling, is because for at least 3 decades, its savings rate was too high and it overinvested in physical goods, okay? Particularly infrastructure and particularly property, okay? So the investment in the high-speed railways and ports, along the East Coast was really paid off handsomely. But all this investment in high-speed railways and airports and so forth increasingly moved inland to smaller and smaller communities where the social payoff was less and less. And also with housing, and it also just overbuilt. Now, what I think China fully realizes now is that it allowed for physical investment and physical augmentation to outpace the pure technological innovation, okay? And that meant that there were the capital output ratio had become too high. Okay, that is, given that there were limits on augmenting labor, its ability to create new technologies that would be worthy of private investment or public investment, because that had not been growing fast enough, but physical investment had been growing so fast, you're getting sharply diminishing returns to physical investment. And so in that way, it can be useful to think of a steady state that in the case of China, it had become very imbalanced. That is, the physical investment just outgrew the capacity, not only of people, but of institutions to be able to really augment the sort of the laboratories, the universities, with the dynamic change that was comparable to and in balance to that in terms of physical investment and the physical side of the economic transformation. So in that sense, I think the steady state can be a sort of a useful concept.
Yes, I do see the insight here that you use the China as an example to illustrate, look, because we didn't follow that, so it is so imbalanced, and now the marginal productivity for capital has been declining, and then
Yes.
we emphasize on the consumption and on people side. So I think I do see the application here. But thank you very much, Gary, for your effort to explain everything clearly. And let's see whether we have more on the floor or in the audience.
I saw Ali's comment in the chat.
Oh,
yeah, Ali has his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. No, just adding on to Hong's question about AI. So one thing interesting was in the table which had capital and labor's definition given, where it talks about how neurons are used to create an idea. That also fits in deep learning or machine learning's definition as well. So what I was asking was that can we also say that AI can also be categorized in the labor section as well now? Not just the technical part, but the labor part of the equation. Just one thought in my head. Yeah.
Well, that's the question. It's a dynamic allocation. Okay, it's not as before a clear-cut division. So it seems to me, where capital goods just produce physical goods. Okay, I mean machines only produce physical goods, and people produce the ideas. Now you're getting this transitional dynamic in which that idea creation capability is increasingly being centered on physical machines. Okay. Now, this is a big issue, that is, to what extent can machine learning really incorporate sort of generative intelligence? Okay. And who's going to own it also? That is, it depends on how you define labor augmenting technical change in some sense. That is, does the technical change have to be actually embedded in the human brain in order to have a patent that represents the human intellectual property and the payouts, from those patents? Or can there be a machine that comes up with an innovative idea? Who gets the patent, and who gets the payout from that? Is it the capitalist or is it the laborer, who gets that, whoever the inventor might have been? So those are things that are not entirely, sorted out either in sort of economic theory or legally. It's a very transitional time that we're in.
Sure. That's all right. Thank you.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, to
Thank
me.
you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Any more? Gary, we had
Yes.
the longest seminar for this entire academic year so far. So really very rich content, I would say. If there is no more comments from the audience, Gary, do you have anything to say before I just close the session?
I just want to thank everyone for the wonderful opportunity. I really appreciated it, and I hope we have another chance.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Gary, on behalf of our members, of colleagues here, so in the audience, I really appreciate your time and your effort, and your talk is so insightful. And let's keep in touch, and hopefully, we have another time, opportunities to meet in person. And so we talk about China. Yeah,
Okay.
China. So in that case, I would like to close this session, and thank you very much for your contribution and for your questions and for your patience. Some of you probably do not come from the background, but I hope you have a lot of things to take away from this talk. Okay, so I will close this session. Thank you very much for everybody.